All right. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Aftermath webinar after show. So, I am Sharita with Metromorphosis, and I was the moderator of the webinar called the Aftermath that Metromorphosis hosted last month, where we wanted to provide some information for citizens and for voters to just help them make sense of this kind of complex election season, but also to give them some tools and strategies for how they can make sure that the people that they elected and the policies that they selected really work for them and work for their communities. And I mean, the conversation that we had last month with Dr. Marlon Smith out of Texas, Jamal Taylor, Jennifer Harding, and today's guest, the Ashley Shelton, was just so enriching, so engaging. For those of you who could not join us, the panel was on fire, but the chat was on fire, and we heard our participants loud and clear. They needed more, they wanted more. There were so many questions, and we couldn't get to all of them on the webinar. And so we thought that we would just follow up with just a little bit more from some of our panelists. So welcome, join me in welcoming Louisiana's Stacey Abrams, right? Ashley Shelton. Ashley Shelton. No, I mean, I saw it across socials, and it was repeated in the chat when someone said Louisiana needs someone like Stacey Abrams, and I mean, like 4 or 5 people came up and said, "We have Ashley Shelton. Ashley Shelton, that kind of thing." And I mean, I think
Look, we're
considering
doing the work. We're doing the work.
well, I mean, considering Stacey Abrams, role in mobilizing voters in Georgia and the significant role that Georgia played in this election, I think you can see the comparison, right, with your work as the director of Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. So let's start there. Talk to me about why voter mobilization is so important, and especially why was it so critical this year?
I think, one of the things that, my career actually, I started in philanthropy. So we were, like I worked at the Baton Rouge Area Foundation. I worked at the Disaster Recovery Foundation, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and have spent a lot of time, putting resources back into community to fuel change and, systemic change and opportunity. But I think one of the things that I always, kind of came out of that disaster, philanthropy experience saying, so let me get this money. I've got, I didn't necessarily have any power, but I certainly was power adjacent, as I call it. And I said, but we still can't change anything. I was like, just to make any sense. So it's not about just power or money. It's actually so we got this nice shiny car, but we didn't have an engine, and people are the engine. And so for us, we knew that being able to ignite the power of, voters of color across this state was going to be really critical to changing our circumstance and changing the ability of historically disenfranchised communities to have voice in the decision-making processes that govern their lives. And so for us, we came to it honest. It was just like, I've done it all the ways you can do it. And ultimately, it really is person by person, community by community, having an appreciation and understanding of what's at stake and actually what your one vote and your voice have the power to do. And it's quite a lot, quite a lot. And I'll say this as well, that in 2019 we saw our power, right, in full display. We had a statewide elections. Governor was on the ticket, as well as most of the legislature. We had term limits come into play in a way where most of the legislature was turning over. And in the primary, we didn't see the kind of turnout that we thought we would see from Black voters. And then we doubled our efforts, made more touches, talked to more Black voters, and talked the power of their vote. And overwhelmingly, Black folks turned out and changed the outcome of this election in many ways. And so for us, making sure as an organization that we are engaging Black voters around their voice and power. Also, our Latinx, brothers and sisters, Pacific Islander, as well as Native, which we have a ton of Native folks right here in our state. Yep. I can't hear you, Sharita. I can't hear.
Sorry about that. So in the chat on the webinar, there were a lot of there was a lot of conversation around the significant impact that voters of color had on the national election. Can you talk a little bit more about that and about the impact that women voters have?
For sure. I mean, I think that, we've seen it in Alabama and so many other places where Black women, have certainly been leading in their communities. Privilege of working with Louisiana, Women Lead, that's led by Maxine Cormier, as well as many other efforts to really center Black women in their voice work, because they make a difference. They're leaders in their families. They link themselves to all their family members, and they get them out to vote because they know what's at stake. So, in particular, so thinking about just right at the moment that we're in, I mean, we saw for the first time in this general election, unprecedented Black voter turnout. We had 30% of, 30% of all Black registered voters early voted. And that is the highest turnout that we've ever seen Black voters in our state for early voting. I mean, so powerful numbers, and I think in addition to that, like being able to just see, that African American voters play in this larger conversation, I'll give you a couple of interesting facts. How about this? If every Black voter or every eligible Black person in the state of Louisiana registered to vote and actively voted, Louisiana would be a mostly we have the second largest Black population in the country proportionally, second only to Mississippi. And, and there's some opportunities for us to have the kind of leadership that we want, given the fact that, our population is so large and, and what are we netting for, like the fact that we've got a large voice, but that we don't see that play out in our politics.
Yeah. And, again, from the chat, and I told y'all the chat had all of the topics in there. Something you mentioned, two things. Number one, you mentioned kind of the Black vote. And then the second thing is you mentioned what we are working towards, what agenda. And so let's talk a little bit about that. And so in the vein of mobilizing voters, there are a number of people who would say, well, the election is over, right? And so what are we mobilizing for? Tell us, what still needs to be done. And so what should voters of color in particular, but progressive voters or in general, what should we be paying attention to?
I mean, I think that one, there was a great graphic that had on their social media about the fact that, runoff elections are specifically set up to diminish the vote. And they know that it's harder for folks to turn out time. It's, less publicized. There's less emphasis and resources put into a runoff election. And so, for that very reason, we've got to pay not only that primary, but also that runoff. And so right now, I mean, so the presidential's over. We saw a large voter turnout for the presidential, which is normal. But then we have what you call infrequent voters. And what that means is somebody that votes for the president, but doesn't really vote otherwise. What we're trying to do is make sure that folks not only understand what was at stake on, for that presidential, but that even in this runoff, that's going to be Saturday, that we've got for East Baton Rouge Parish specifically, we've got a mayoral runoff that's critical that we need folks to turn out for. So, you get to decide the leadership. We've seen more than ever in this Corona environment that your elected leaders are deciding your public health, your public safety. They're making decisions about a lot of things that are very important to me and my family, and certainly to others. And so you have to make sure that you vote and participate so that you can protect or make sure that you have a leader in place that's going to family and your interest. And so in addition to that, we have, several city council seats as well. And the closer the elected office to where you live, the more you have in determining the quality of your life. And so we always want folks to remember that, like even, in the sense of like this first election, there's always a runoff, and we participating every single time. The other thing I would say too is that year round, what we're asking folks to do when you do your New Year's resolutions this year, that you include engagement resolution, that you think about like what are ways that you can be engaged, because it's not just about folks getting elected or you electing leadership that you feel like will your values, but we need to make sure that we actually hold them accountable to that. And the only way to do that is to make those phone calls, set up those meetings, and really push them around the issue important to you. Because if you don't do that, I always tell folks the favorite thing, the thing that elected leaders say to me the most, that's the most frustrating is, well, I'm not hearing that from constituency. And I remind them that I've talked to 6,000 people in their constituency, and I know for a fact that they are saying it. They may not be telling you.
They're not saying it to them, right? But somebody's saying it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like we've got to engage beyond just the, we've got to be, kind of, pushing and fighting all the time. And, and when we do it, we win. I mean, we saw a young woman in New Orleans, Sade Dumas. They were protesting and the officers were using tear gas. She worked with many partners. Power Coalition was proud to be one of them. And she banned the use of tear gas in the city of New Orleans. And so, so the ability to change things in your community isn't hard. It's just, but there has to be, you can work with, elected leaders that are willing to be responsive and accountable to the people that they serve, and for them to be really clear that they're in service to the people in their district and or their state, not to political interests, business interests, all of these other things that get in the way of them actually being accountable to people that they serve and doing people-centered work.
Yeah. So, someone mentioned on the webinar that they were tired of being courted, by elected officials, by politicians. And then once they are in office, then it's like they don't hear from them anymore. And you mentioned that a number of elected officials say, well, I'm not hearing that from my constituents. I'm not hearing that. How do we make sure that our elected officials hear from us after the election?
Yeah, it's so much easier than you think. I always tell folks, like they've got there's a number on all of, most of them have a website. There is a phone number with the office and a person that typically works for the elected official. So make a phone call, write a letter, invite them to your church, invite them to your community meeting, your neighborhood association. They're excited to be engaged in these stations. They don't actually want to be on the outside looking in. They actually do want to be in your communities if they're a good leader. And I would say that, so I've seen so many that want to be engaged in that way. And so don't be afraid to say, come talk to, my elementary school class, come talk to, my church group, my neighborhood association. Phone call. Also too, one of the other things I always tell folks to do, go set up an appointment to go sit in their office and say, I've lived here my whole life and here are the concerns I have, and how can you help me, create real solutions? And it doesn't, sometimes we think it has to be a big, powerful church or a big, giant group of people. It really has to be a few committed people that are willing to, to fight the fight, and then bring others in to support and create cover for that elected official as they what it is that they say they want. And so, like I said, it's not difficult, send an email, get on the phone, gentle stalking, they're busy. They've got a lot of things on their plate, but you can call more than once. It's okay. Don't get frustrated, because ultimately, being in service your job. And so, put a little effort into, trying to make that connection. And I promise you, you'll see results. And then ways that you can also create accountability. And so, we talk about doing op-ed pieces where you're writing a letter to the editor of the newspaper, or, holding community forums where you're talking about, an issue. And most of our elected officials, if they're worth their salt, they're going to show up, right? But you got to invite them.
Yeah.
You got, I mean, but at the end of the day, I feel like there's lots of opportunities and ways that we can engage our elected officials, and we shouldn't just think about it during, election season, but we should all year long. And one of my, like one of my favorite, things is, sometimes when you go to a city council meeting, you know, like watching folks in action and listening to the things that they're saying, and then also saying like, hey, like what, we never ask elected officials, what's your 100-day plan? What are you going to days in office? Those are critical opportunities for to prioritize things that are critical and important to you and members of your community. And so there are lots of different ways to but again, I think building that relationship is the first step, and then working with them to try to create solutions. And again, so want may be very specific to you, and there may not be a community solution, but at least they'll be able to help get, find somewhere to start, right? Or find a public that can provide whatever service or support that you're looking for. And so they don't have all the answers, but they do at least have a nice Rolodex of resources and city services that you can tap into.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I heard you say, phone calls, emails, inviting them out to churches and other community events, and just building that relationship and engaging with them, right? Are all wonderful opportunities, wonderful ways. And asking the right questions, making sure that whatever your interests are, you hear from the elected officials on where they stand on those. And again, those all sound like wonderful opportunities. But so here's a quote right from the chat from last month's webinar. I'm fatigued. I've been fatigued since like 2015. I
Mhm.
feel like 2020 just put issues that a lot of people have been talking about for decades on a billboard. So I'm indifferent. What do you say to people who are just tired, right?
Yeah.
They want to be engaged, they want to hold elected officials accountable, but phone calls and emails and showing up at I mean, it especially in this year, the pandemic. What do
Yep.
you say to someone who says that's just a lot of work, Ashley? What do you say?
So here's what I think about. So you think about any change process, personal, professional, even in nature, like it's always hardest right before before it breaks, right? Like before it breaks wide open into what you want it to be, or or an opportunity to even, achieve a dream. It's always hardest right before. And so I know, so I'm as fatigued as anybody. And and so I get it. I'm with you. I am tired. I'm tired, two syllables tired, not even just it's one. Okay. So
Right.
I get it, but I think that, but I feel like that's the trick, right? Is that like they exhaust us with so much foolishness. And these last 4 years have been in particularly have been particularly exhausting. But what I think though is that we have been fighting, and this is the moment. Either we're going to push win, or we can say I'm tired and then step back, and then they hold the line on all of the things that we are all this time. And so, one thing that comes to mind is, for example, every solution to COVID-19 in the federal bill was something I've been, the Power Coalition's been fighting for years. The $15 an hour, that additional income that they provided through insurance, that was exactly $15 an hour, right? The like so many of the policies and the things fighting for, they found all the answers to in the Federal CARES Act solution to buoy families through this process. And so one, that proved that they know how thing. They can figure out how to do the right thing, but then come back right back around a few months later, and they're so disconnected at the, some of these so disconnected from community. They didn't even know the 600 additional dollars was more than most people could have expected anyway, because they were that most people make minimum 7.25 an hour. And so
Mhm.
this additional money was having that kind of impact on their communities. And so, and then the narrative of, oh, folks are home waiting on a check, and all the lies, when we know the reality is that if you work in the hospitality industry, those jobs aren't coming back for.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what are we talking about? What are we, what are we trying to, what are we trying to address? Like at the end of the day, we're in a moment where either we're going to fight to the and actually realize racial equity and justice, or or we're not. And then I think the other thought that I think is also important to sorry is that it's that everybody, that there's shifts, right? There's shifts and levels to all of this.
Yeah.
Like when I'm tired, that I am so proud of is that there are all these young people, that are coming and standing with us.
Yeah.
Our elders are tapping to say, like, you take a break. I'm going to stand in for you while
Yeah.
you do you take respite. And so I do think that we've got to know our enough to say I'm exhausted, and I need some downtime so that I can come back refreshed and renewed about what's at stake. Time that it's okay to be tired, because God knows I'm tired, and I try to be good about self-care, and I try to make sure that it's a part of my everyday routine. But I also suffer from that anxiety of, if I just push one more day, if I just do one more meeting, if I just do one more thing, then we could be that much closer to racial justice and equity and all of these things that we fight for every day. And so I'm guilty, but I
Yeah.
also I see what's right across like what's right across the field, right? Like that there is a real opportunity for us to realize what our ancestors fought for, what we've been fighting for, and that hard as the day, as long and as tired as the days are, that we've got to tag in and out when we need to, but that we're just close. And I just feel like
Yeah.
before transformation happens, it's always this pain. There's always this pain point, and we've got to determine whether or not we can bear it to get transformation.
Yeah, you what you just described is something that I call the dreamer doer's dilemma. This idea that, oh, maybe I'm just asking too much. I'm doing too much, and then it's like, no, maybe I can. It'll happen tomorrow. Like if I just keep going, it'll happen tomorrow. And so this balance of, I know this is a lot. I know that this is going to be tough and it's going to be rough. But if I just go a little further, right, it'll happen.
Mhm.
And so I think we saw a lot of people in feeling that in 2020, and not just because of the election. I think just 2020, the year with the pandemic and the racial injustice that we saw. I just think it made people kind of do this dance between how much more I can take, and I just got to do a little bit more, right? Someone
Right.
on in the chat said, the current administration has been a godsend because it pulled back the covers of the flawed American experiment, right? This idea that more and more people are seeing now that the system wasn't designed for everyone, and that there are some people whose voices have been intentionally left out of the conversation. And so two questions came from that kind of comment in the chat. The first question is, how do we bolster those marginalized voices? How do we bring them into the conversation? And then secondly, that the onus can't just be on communities of color, like that there has to be a pull from everyone, if we're going to see some real change. What are your thoughts on those two things?
Lots of thoughts. I mean, I think in terms of the, like the bolstering of this. I mean, I think that like we're in it. It's happening. I think that at the end of the day, for me, I just feel like so much in 2020, and also let's be clear, what has happened in 2020 has been happening in years previous. I mean, I don't, there've been some, more egregious crimes and things that have happened, to certainly in the African American community, but in our native and Latinx communities as well. Like this is like this is about knowing your history, right? And knowing that none of this is behaviors that that have happened time and time again. And I think that yes, people's eyes have been opened to it, but I think that for those of us who do this right? I am clear that I've got to tell as many people as possible, one, who you vote for and whether or not they're willing to pass policies that are going to free me and my people. That matters to me. I want to know what you're about. I want to know how you feel about this never ending cycle of criminalization and poverty that people of color get trapped in. What are you I don't want you to make a donation or make the square on your Instagram page black and then you don't do anything to fight for black. I don't, that doesn't do anything for me. I want action. I want change. I want to visibly see the things that we know are systemic and structural that keep people of color, in particular black people, locked, like I said, in just a never ending cycle of criminalization and poverty. And the answer to do about it. I don't, we can cry together. We can have long conversations about racial injustice and how it is played out in our lives. I feel like that I've had a lot of those conversations. I've shared and been vulnerable. And now I feel like it's time for folks to come back and give back policy change through leadership, through extreme vulnerability, give back to people of color what has been taken and been 400 years, right? And I think that, but one of the things that I think we have to do is that, we do have to stand with people and give them the do these things that are hard, because it's what the other thing that we found out is that, and even through the this last election, there are a lot of think that I shouldn't have a voice, that you shouldn't have a voice, that that women have a place,
Yeah.
all things that I thought would be on a really long time ago, and those narratives are as powerful and strong as ever. And so I think that like this idea that can't just be us. I mean, I think it's always just been us, or not just, but I mean, I think it's mostly been the African American community fighting for itself, with movements and other movement leaders to try to create change, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that it has proven results. Would like do is work that that certainly our white allies have to do. Do I think that there is significant opportunity really understand, because I think I tried to relay it, but I it kind of didn't come out the way I wanted to in the webinar, was that like my lived experience is not that of a white person. My lived reality is not that of a white person. And so what I assume is that some of like that we're worrying about same things, we are not worrying about some of the same things,
Yeah.
like because doesn't even occur to them that when their 17-year-old son who's 200 pounds and 6'4" goes out to go hang out with his friends, that anything could possibly happen to him. It never occurs to them that I can, if something happened today, that I have to think about whether or not I want to call the police.
Yeah.
That never occurs to them. And so I think that like that reality of how shielded they've, like that folks have been with by their privilege blows my, like it's not fair. And I feel like we have to we need to live in the reality of the America that is, and not just have to bear the responsibility because I'm a Black person, that like the injustice of this country falls on the shoulders of us. But I also think that the reason it does is because that experience is unique to us
Yeah.
and our Native brothers and Latinx brothers and sisters as well. And so I think that that's the piece, is that like to really acknowledge that there is something happening to other people that isn't okay, isn't, and that it's okay, and that we all have to make ourselves uncomfortable, not just some people, not just Black people, not just Native people, not just Latinx people, white, like we've got to all be uncomfortable long enough to change this, like I said, to realize transformation. And
Yeah.
transformation doesn't come with, it doesn't come easy. It's not easy. It doesn't come
Yeah.
without an emotional and physical toll, right? And I think that
Right.
until we're willing to do that work, and to acknowledge that there are experiences in this country, and that we, as much as we tried to level the playing field, the reality is that racial housing discrimination is is as bad as it's ever been. Maternal reproductive rights, we're seeing more and are dying in childbirth. I mean, I can go down the line, statistic for statistic, that like it, education. I mean, all of the things that are supposed to be better because something out, or we integrated, or we did whatever we did, all of the numbers are still terrible. In fact, they're worse than, they're worse than they've ever been. And I think work that we have to do is to say that it's not okay, for Black women to be dying in childbirth. It's not okay to be separating mothers and children, regardless of their immigration status. It's not okay to steal people's land, here, hundreds and hundreds of years later. It's not okay. And there's a price and a responsibility that we all hold to fight for those, for the voices of those that have been historically disenfranchised.
Yeah, yeah. As you were talking, I kept thinking about that old saying where people say change ain't cheap, right? This idea that there is a cost, there is, and even if you don't pay the cost directly, right? Someone is paying the cost either in, their sweat, their tears, and occasionally their blood. We don't like to think about that. And so, I mean, just as you were talking, I was thinking about the number of people who had to endure some of the stuff that we're still talking about today. Like you said, the stuff in 2020 is not new, right? And there have been years and
Right.
years and decades of people who are having to endure this, and here we are. And to a certain extent, it is an experience that is unique to Black folks and to other people of color. And you said something on the webinar that people just kind of, I mean, all kind of snaps and everything, in the chat. You said stop celebrating oppression and calling it resilience.
Yep. No, it's so true. I tell people all the time, I said, resilience is short term. It's like I'm stretching myself so that you can fix a problem,
Mhm.
and then I'm okay because you fixed it, right? But if you
Mhm.
never fix it and move forward, like, well, wow, they can just handle anything. She can. Not resilience, that's oppression, and we have to call that what that is. And yes, the people of Louisiana are beautifully resilient people, but but I want to be and make that distinction between moments where we're being resilient, and forced into this into survival mode or whatever you want to call it. And
Mhm.
but also too, and just call that what that is, which is, like I said, it's oppression. That's not like I survived this one incident and get to live happily ever after. No, this is prolonged, inaction about a problem that we're all experiencing and somehow surviving through. And that, certainly has an element of resiliency in it, but it is not, but I hate when people say that because I feel like they dress it up and overlook the fact that really we're leaving folks to figure things out on their own when that is the whole purpose of government. It's,
Right.
when we did the recovery, the federal dollars far outweighed the local and dollars that were at play. But getting those federal dollars to the ground was one of the hardest things that we ever did, and still didn't get nearly as much of it to the ground as we that even was for the effort that we put forth in getting it to the ground. And so, I just remind people that we have to be careful when talking about resilience, that like, if it is that, but if it's really just oppression, like, let's call it that.
Yeah.
And stop marveling at this idea that somehow folks can survive, because we can talk about that. That isn't the same as, their portrayal of resilience as this, like, wow, look at them, they survived anyway. Like, who? That's not the answer. The answer
Yeah.
should be like, like, they're holding on and we're going to fix it so that they can move forward with their lives. And I think that that's the part that we don't ever want to do, the
Mhm.
problem, so that people
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
move forward and not have.
You were talking about something that at Metromorphosis we kind of hold dear, and it makes me think about kind of this systems change work, and you alluded to it earlier, but I kind of want to switch gears just a little bit, because this idea of resilience, versus oppression, and when I think about those two, especially in terms of time, the length of time, a lot of times we can see, these things that were put in place that people endure, but they exist for generations, right? And so things that we saw in the 60s, and all praises to our ancestors for what they endured in the 60s, but some of that stuff is still showing up in 2020, and so now we call that oppression, right? And um so I want to switch just a little bit and talk about kind of voter mobilization, voter engagement from this both generational piece, but also from this systems change piece, right? And so I'll start with something from the chat. One of the things, so systems change is defined as moving those conditions that hold a problem in place, right? And so if we think about just oppressive tactics for elections, right? We could say that there are certain conditions that are holding oppression in place. In the chat, somebody brought up money, talking about change ain't cheap, right? Let's talk about money and how people with wealth have the opportunity to invest in political campaigns and causes, right? And typically, wealthy people are not people of color, right? Like, just historically, people of color have less wealth than white people. And so there's this conversation around the connection between wealth and politics. And someone says, so what can we do? Um, and I'm pausing because we're coming off a Giving Tuesday where philanthropy was and one of the things that I said on my social was philanthropy is power, because I feel like being able to give and support causes, even if it's just a small amount, is people expressing their power. And so, but let's talk about that, in terms of the election. So someone asked, what can people who don't have a lot of wealth, what can we do to combat the impact or the influence that extreme wealth has on the election?
I think the statement that comes is the only answer to organized money is organized people, right? And so, if we're going to combat that, then we've got to take the asset that we do have. Is we've got, in our major metros, all of them are now predominantly African American, and so how do we use that voting power? How do we use our voices to actually walk in the power that we have in the largest communities in our state? And so I think that, like, for me, like that, like what that can look like is, like how, we can come together precinct by precinct, we can come together, city council district by city council district, we can come together by how. There's so many ways to do it, but I do think that, it's not, like one of the things that I've learned is that, it takes 3 to 5 touches to really engage somebody and get them to vote. And we know if we do that, of our universe, about 60% of them will vote, hands down. And so, which is huge in terms of like voter math, right? Like, so if you're running a campaign and you want to understand like how to move, the fact that I can, with no candidate, right? No, I'm nonpartisan, just talking to folks about voting and reconnecting them to their vote and their power, that I can turn out 60, our universe right now is, for the current races that we're working on, it's 700,000. Of that 700,000 folks, with the unbelievable turnout for the presidential, but certainly again for this runoff, I can tell you 60 of that 700,000 being at play is real, right? Like, that's a real number that, as folks are doing campaigns across the state, they have to consider. And infrequent voters of color, so voters that don't vote all the time. And so being able to put their voices in play in these elections on a consistent basis is a game changer.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
for us, that's what the power, like for us, that's what we call our pathway to power. It's like, how are we engaging and making sure that every person of color in the state is ensuring that they're voting, their voice is heard, so that we can get to a better place and get to a place where we have actual representation that sounds like some I believe in. I mean, because I think that if, you can watch a city council meeting, you can watch the state legislature. And I mean, 5 minutes in, I need an Advil and a break. And
Right.
so I always tease folks that, like that, like I was like, who are these people? And then when you go into community and talk to community, they reflect what they feel either. So I was like, well, who do y'all represent? Well, they represent business and industry and whatever body gave them the money. And the only response to that is organized people. And I think that we've got to get organized. We've got to, kind of learn how to speak and move. Certainly we're not, and I wouldn't expect us to move and speak as a monolith, but I do think that we've got to understand our power and be able to exercise it in a way that, that ensures that we're a community that at least is thoughtful of our experiences and the needs that we have in our community. And
Yeah.
also how with the solution, because that's the other thing is that the wrong leadership sees a problem and then they do hard things to fix the problem. And we've been seeing this for this tough on crime
Yeah.
stuff for since before I was born, but definitely before you were born. And at the end of the day, I was like, what's better? Nothing's better.
Yeah.
More people are, and you've got worse crime than you've ever had. And oh, by the way, we're in the midst of a humanitarian crisis created by
Yep.
this pandemic that is unfortunately going to make all of that. People don't have anywhere to go and anything to look to. And our federal government just spent the last month installing a new Supreme Court justice, but they didn't to save the people of America. And so again, the only thing, and the reason they can do that is because nobody's going to do anything about it. All of those led that process that prioritizes Supreme Court justice over food on the table for American families, all of them just got reelected.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, again, you can't allow the lie to become true, which is that your vote doesn't matter. That's a lie. If it didn't matter, they wouldn't be working so hard. Your vote and your voice are absolutely critical. And that's why we've seen this rampant voter suppression, polling location changes, always more of them in the African-American community than in other places, all the things. And I just think that we've got to fight to make sure that we exercise our much as possible so that there's new behavior that says that you're not going to be able to win and represent a group of people if you're not willing to do that they're asking you to do on behalf of Black folks in the community. And so I think that that's the place that we've got to get to. And Power Coalition's here to help. I'm asking folks to do it by themselves. We're here. We can help you write an op-ed. We can help you organize your neighborhood association. We can help you connect with churches and other around the city that are doing similar work. I mean, we're here to provide resources. One of my favorite things that we do is we provide data to prove what is happening to you. Sometimes that's all it takes for us to be able to actually realize system change is that, one, to just prove that if something's wrong with your drinking water or change the bus route to facilitate, we actually had this happen in New Orleans. They changed the Desire bus route, which had been a historical bus route, to Bywater, Marigny, bus route. And at the end of the day, all the older Black women that had been using that bus route for years and years and years were disenfranchised because they were trying to cater to the new fancy gentrifiers. And it's like, whoa. And so we were able to, collect the data and prove what was happening to them and make the case for, do whatever you want to do, but this bus line needs to exist. So I think, that's one of our favorite things to do with. So we're here for that. So if you need data support, you need to prove what's happening in your community, you need support reaching out to your elected officials. I mean, we've got a team on the ground, and we're here for that all day.
Yeah. So, I think it's funny that even with this conversation, I'm scanning my list of questions and you're touching on things that people came up and I'm like, we're still not going to have enough time because, this is it's so complex, but it's not exactly complicated. Right. But it just takes these conversations have for people to kind of understand all of the options that are available to them. Someone in the chat actually talked about helping using data-informed decisions using data to inform decisions that reflect the will of the people, right? And so it is good to hear that the Power Coalition helps people to do that. And that's one of the things that, also at Metromorphosis that we try to do in terms of just lifting up the community voice and sharing that information with those who make decisions, so that decisions aren't made that actually go against the interests, right, of the people. I want to talk about one other important thing before I let you go, though, because I think as we're talking about um, all of this, but especially as we're talking about what's next and what's to come, young people, right? And I
Yeah.
know I'm younger than you, but as someone, one of the teenagers in my Bible class once told me, it's like, you're old, Miss Sharita. What you talking about? We're not as old as you. And I'm like, okay, fine. So young people, right? Um,
Yeah.
how do they fit? How do they get involved? But then also, how can those of us who have been around a little longer make sure that there's a space for young people who want to be involved?
No, one thing I'll say too is that like we saw almost a 13% increase in registered voters aged 18. And so super excited about that.
Yeah, yeah,
There are 30,000, 30,000 new voter registrations this year of African American voters. And so about that. And like I said, and about 13% of that were Black folks between the ages of 18 and 25. And so one is making sure you register to vote. You can register as young as can't vote till you're 18, but you can register young. And so, exercising that franchise, even if you don't know what to do, I think part of so much of what we do is try to take the fear. It's like, here's a sample ballot. Here's what you're going to see when you go into the ballot. Here are the questions you can ask before you go into the process. Here's a website that can each of these candidates. Let me tell you about the power each of these candidates have so that you can understand, like, why you need to care, right? And so it's like there's like several judicial on our on the ballot, and folks are like, why do I care about that? I was like, well, those judges decided whether or not your house is going to get floor on. This judge is going to decide on your custody agreement. This judge is going to decide. There's so many, and judges do different things, but there's so many ways that they actually end up touching your.
yeah,
And even when we do warrant claims, where we try to like clear fines and fees that folks have been charged but couldn't afford, I always remind them that agreed to do this was elected, right? Like the judge that is deciding to give people their lives back and deciding to do the right thing was an elected judge. And what if
yeah,
we the right one? What if we elect the right person? And so what I challenge our young folks to do, look, we did over like 700,000 text messages last year of our GOTV campaign, and I promise you the young people from high schools and the HBCUs burned it up like that. It was they were like, how is this? I was like, these young people from all over were texting and engaging. And, we fed them and created spaces for them. But the other that I'm super excited about is that, we've also been doing these things like bike and rides. We
mhm,
just had one Saturday in New Orleans, Baton
yeah,
Rouge. 88% of folks that participated in the bike and ride, they were first time voters. And so I
wow,
think also too, we've got to make sure that we're finding people where they are, right? Like that, what appeals to me necessarily appeal to a young person, but we were able to get so many people out to vote, and it was just through something that they thought was fun and engaging. And so I think that honest is on us to meet people where they are. And also too, like we've got a texting platform. We're more than happy for any group to use that texting platform whenever they feel like it, if, as long as it's people-centered work and a campaign that is about, our issue campaign that's about centering an issue that grounded in what's best for community. We're always happy to share our resources. I can pull a list of everybody that lives in your precinct. I can pull a list of everybody that lives in neighborhood. We got a lot of technology and a lot of data to do things. We also have tools like One Click. I can, you can send an email out where you can literally click the link immediately to whoever the elected official is that you need to talk to. So if it's a city level campaign, then it'll connect you right to your city council member. And so for us, it's been about like, how do we create things that make it easier to engage young people? But I have to tell you, they have shown up and showed out. Like they have been texted, and I invite folks to do a power hour, for come join us. We're not asking for a lifelong commitment, but we're just saying, give us 1 hour, come
Yep.
text, phone bank. But,
Yep.
you can do virtually. I can send you a link and you can be text messaging within 10 minutes. Right. And
Oh, that's
so,
cool.
yep. And so I think there are lots of ways to, engage folks, but I think that we also have to see is how this impacts their future too. That I think that, like this idea that you're young and free and, you don't have bills yet and all these things. Well, the reality is that that's actually not true for most of our young people. Like they've been, young people of color grow up faster, have responsibilities and jobs earlier. Play a central role in their families, income. I mean, all of these things. And so my thing is that if that is true, which we know it's data to support it, then they need to be as involved as their parents in trying to fight for the kind of leadership that's going to say that this kid can be as long as they want to be a kid.
Yeah.
And also fight for leaders that are going to make sure that we have real economic opportunities and career ladders for people in our community. And so I think, at the end of the day, there's, endless opportunities, but the best advice I can give is meet people where they are. People are smart and they have lots to offer. And even if you're not 18 and you can't vote, you can text, you can
Yeah.
call your friends, you can put out a Facebook message, share all the cool, we got Big Frida to do some messaging for us on GOTV. It's like, hey, whoever you're listening to,
Right.
whoever your
Right.
people are, right? Like we want to try and say that like we hear you, I understand why this may not seem like it's important, but let me tell you why it's
Yeah.
important, right? And
Yeah.
make those connections.
Yeah, that's so great. I think it's so important though because you have approaches from both sides, right? You have the young people that are both driving voter efforts, right, with the texting and being able to volunteer and on some of this mobilization. But then you also have approaches that remind them of the fact that they are the recipients and if done correctly, right, the beneficiaries of these elections. And so I think that is so important because as someone who still considers herself a young person and emerging, I like to call us emerging leaders, right? People coming up because, but as someone who is still very much young, being able to have that agency to contribute, but then also being able to see how this is going to impact our futures, I think is super, super important. So on behalf of young people across Louisiana, thank you. Thank you so much for your efforts. So we are out of time, and I love that you called it the power hour because I kept thinking, "Ooh, I'm about to have my own little personal power hour with Ashley Shelton." Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for answering the questions that were in the chat from last month's Aftermath webinar. We are going to link Power Coalition to this video, wanting people to just connect with you guys for some of your amazing resources. I will ask you if you have any closing remarks for us, but I want to share this quote from the chat because I think it's just so important and it really embodies what we're trying to do here today. And it says, "Democracy doesn't have an off season."
That's it. No, I mean, and I think, that's our reality, right? I think, like I tell people all the time, when they were like, what, why Louisiana? And I always remind them, I said, everything I love is in this place. And so as much for our young people as for folks that have, lived there here all their lives, you know, everything I love is in this place. And this is about what my children will inherit, right? Like, like at this point, I'm just fighting for, a city that they want to stay in, state that they want to stay in. And
Yeah.
so it's personal, right? Like this, like this isn't some amorphous thing that like I'm asking somebody to care about because I care about it. To care about it because I need you to care about it, because at the end of the day, if we're not caring, this is how we get in the moment where we're repeating this, the same fight already won. And then here we are in 2020 fighting the same fights our ancestors fought in the 60s. And
Mhm.
and so at this point we all it's going to take all of us to get involved and fight for the kind of change that we want to see. But more importantly, to fight for the kind of change that, creates a different pathway for our children. I tell people all the time, everything I love is in this place, but there also is a price too for the trauma that, in particular, women of color carry around. I have to worry about my son. I have to worry about my husband. I have to worry about my family. I have to worry about all these things because of all of the realities of systemic and structural racism. And how much greater and how much more space would my mind, body, and spirit have if I didn't have to carry those traumas with me every day, making sure protecting, covering, even though, as a mama, you're gonna do that anyway. But it would be nice to not have to worry about regular things, not to have to worry about, negative encounters with the police, worry about, anything they do being, characterized in a negative way,
Right.
and then also having then only a punitive response, right? Because not every, our juvenile system is, almost, it's 90% African, and I don't think that 90% of teenagers getting into trouble are African American.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, like, but other kids are presented other and less punitive options. And so let's fight for it, guys. Let's fight
Yeah.
for it. I mean, we've got these judges, we've got city council seats, we've got the mayor in Baton Rouge. Um, on the ballot, like, let's fight for what we want, and your one vote is as important as anything else, and is your vote connected to my vote, connected to Sharita's, all the difference in realizing the kind of community we want to live in. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity, always here to help. And then there were a few questions in the chat that we didn't get much deeper, kind of organizing issue-based campaign questions. Here for it all day. So excited about the opportunity to build out campaigns, and really kind of look at specific issues. But that's what we do. So we're happy to work with groups to try to figure out how we actually can get to and build out issue-based campaigns that actually solve problems at a systemic level, not just at a surface level. And so again, we're so grateful to be with you, to Sharita, and to work with Metromorphosis and realizing system change for the people of Louisiana.
Yeah. The Ashley K. Shelton with the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Thank you. Thank you so
No,
much.
thank you. This has been great. This has been
Yeah.
great. I am so grateful for the space, and I told you right after, we need to do it again. We need to do it
Yep.
again. And
Yep.
so I know that we're both Metromorphosis and Power Coalition, that we're both committed to creative, because I think that those conversations are so therapeutic for folks that are trying to figure out how to get in. Like, how do I even get in? How do I even, it's like double Dutch. Like, okay, like figure out like how to
Like, is
get
it
into the
now? Go now.
right, right.
Yeah.
Is it the city council meeting? Is it the neighborhood meeting? Is it,
Yeah.
and the answer is it's all of it. But
It's all of it.
we can certainly start by creating these kinds of spaces where, folks can ask questions and folks can understand all the resources that are available to them in community, whether it be Metro Power Coalition, YWCA. I mean, there's the list, Vote and others, that the list goes on. I mean, we've got so many great folks doing really good work, and we need to think about the functionality of that work to move the needle.
Yeah. So guys, you know, we are going to link to Power Coalition. We're going to link to all of those resources that we shared on the original Aftermath webinar. We're going to link as much, and we encourage you to click on those links and take advantage of all the resources and tools, the opportunities that Ashley mentioned, to be engaged in not just some of the elections, right, but all of the elections, and all of the races and the issues and policies that are impacting our lives. As Ashley said, it's personal. So keep in mind that if you have not already, Baton Rouge has the runoff election this Saturday. Please, 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 if you have not already cast your vote during early voting, please go out this Saturday, cast your vote. We have some Metro Council positions on the ballot. We have our mayoral race on the ballot. And so democracy doesn't have an off season. Now's not the time to sit out. We know you're tired. You can take a rest, but then you got to get back in there. And so thank you so much for tuning in to this. Thank you again, Ashley. And I know we will be talking again because there are so many more questions. Have a good evening.
All right. Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.